Wait. Okay, I see it on, yeah. So I suppose we only had one question, and yes, this is our weekly Sangha call for the US. And as far as we know, Dhammarato is still in recovery, and that's good news, I suppose. And Michael is giving us updates and stuff like that, so feels good. Yeah, feels good to know that Dhammarato is on his way to getting out soon, I hope. And so, Edward, the question was, you having looping thoughts about some difficult, stressful experience, like you said, about cortisol in your body, and then that replays in your mind over and over. And then you wanted to know how everyone here deals with that. Something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. How do you usually do it? You just see the thought and you just relax. You said anapanasati helps. And what was loving awareness, by the way? I didn't really understand what that means.
Well, it might be formally known as nurture positive in the unified mindfulness system, but it's focusing on loving awareness, just good feelings, and maybe it includes like, may all beings be happy and well. It could include thoughts like that, but also just radiating a sense of love, or sometimes it's like a dialogue with source, like I love you, source, I love you, awareness, and you love me. And then maybe you try to like thin that subject object relationship until you just see pure love. Are you familiar with any of that?
No, to be honest. I pick up on some of the words you say from other. Yeah, usually I don't hear the word source too much. But if I remember, you mean like, what does that mean? Actually, what does that mean?
Okay, well, some of the time I feel like I am the body mind, the ego. And then source, I would point to as consciousness, or that which is aware of the ego. And it's this dualistic relationship that arises. And I think that I am in consciousness or in this reality. Does that make any sense? And I can connect with love through the ego. And when I do that, I often see how the relationship is non-dual. It's actually just one thing. It's been an illusion the whole time that I'm not the body mind. That's just a thought that appears with an awareness, and really all I am is pure awareness.
Yeah, I mean, what we usually would be recommended, I believe, if Dhammarato was asked this question, he would just talk about seeing these thoughts as unwholesome thoughts. And when you see these thoughts, you can actually nurture yourself as these thoughts come up, because they definitely can have that spiky, triggering feeling in the body that when these thoughts are just getting triggered, that if you just keep noticing these thoughts and keep understanding that it's not a problem to fix the fact these thoughts are happening and you're getting triggered over and over. That's not a problem in itself. And what you can do is just constantly nurture yourself as this happen, and congratulate yourself for catching this over and over and over. And what happens is this conditions a reaction to these experiences where the mind starts to recognize it's not a problem, and you become a lot less resistant to that experience. And in my experience too, what happens is it erodes it over time. When you do it over and over and over, what happens is you kind of detach from that disliking of being triggered. You just don't even care anymore, or you care a lot less, right? And then you may eventually arrive at just simply not caring. that this is even happening anymore. It's really no big deal. So he would always point out everything's okay, everything's all right, and that's a really helpful way to go about it. I don't know if anyone else has some other useful way of handling that looping, difficult. I guess people call it trauma nowadays, right? It sounds like, you know, these traumatic experiences. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some other ways people have dealt with it, but that's very useful for me.
I have a question about what Edward just said.
His question was he's having looping thoughts that are sort of coming from a very difficult experience. What is the best way to deal with them?
Oh yeah, yeah, but there's one word that he said. I was curious. Edward, you said something about ego and love in one sentence.
When I was talking about ego and love, you're trying to get clarification on what I said. Is that right?
Yeah, because I'm curious, why would you put ego and love in the same sentence, like as if those two are mutually related?
Yeah, so I feel like there's different types of love. Maybe you could say lowercase L love or egoic love, like romantic love. And you can use that love, experience capital L love or all caps love, source love. And it's like something I do, like I focus on, oh, I love my cats. I love my cats. And, you know, and then I just start feeling good. And then I notice, where is this good feeling coming from? Oh, it's coming from source. And that narrative of I am doing the loving is sort of illusory. It seems real at the time, but when I look at it, I'm like, oh, it's all coming from source. It's all coming from, I don't know.
You mean like as if the love come from external rather than internal?
Can you say that again?
Oh no, I mean, are you saying those love feels like coming from external and not internal?
Oh yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, you can think of it like that there is external love and internal love. But I would argue the more you deeply look into external love, the more you'll see internal love, and vice versa. And that's why it's like a non-dualistic relationship.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes, I was just curious because I don't. Because from my understanding, ego always kind of get in the way of love. But when you put it that way, maybe it's something different. So yeah, I don't have any comment on that.
Yeah. So does anyone else have a helpful way of dealing with looping thoughts that have their kind of origins in very difficult experience? No. Besides what I mentioned.
I feel like Edward has found his way to his own languaging of a metta practice, although I would question some of the complexity, but I wouldn't want to criticize. If what you're using, Edward, is working, it is for right now, for the situation that was causing the trauma, use it. But investigate when you can, when you're comfortable, and investigate these conceptual distinctions like source and parsing love into these separate distinctions. And also you might want to investigate if these feelings are originating in the body or in the mind, or if these memories of trauma are held in the body when you can. But, you know, whatever works for anxiety. Sometimes when we peel back the coarser layers of anxiety, then there's subtle restlessness. And so, you know, whatever works, yeah. In this Sangha, stick with the practice, stick with the breath. What I've found in times of anxiety too is to kind of stick with one technique. Anapanasati works for me, but it was a time-bound process for me. It's not instant always, especially in the case of restlessness arising or memory-based traumas that are held. But even calling it trauma, I think in the practice here, it's not, you know, there is much simpler ways of perceiving these. I think the Dhammarato would point to if he were here.
Yeah. But sometimes I don't know
All
what
I'm
else
saying
to
is,
call it other than trauma if like I feel like my life was threatened. Or something like so shocking. Maybe trauma is not the right word, but I think it could be a useful category. And Anapanasati, I'm glad it works for you because it works for me too. I use that and catching it, like you were saying, I think it's Cathal. When you catch,
Yes.
You become aware, oh, I'm lost in thought. I'm thinking negative thoughts. And then you do the technique Anapanasati. Every time I do that, I'm like, yes, I got it.
You just, yeah, you just
And
want to keep
I
seeing
good.
more clearly that just happens itself. That's really what you want to see, is that's happening itself. And the more clearly you see this is happening itself, it's not a big problem. Because wanting that to be different is the problem. Wanting to change that thought coming up is the problem. You just detach from that disliking of that experience coming up, like those thoughts coming up, those triggers. You just dislike it. Sorry, you just stop, falling into the disliking of that because you see more clearly that's just happening itself, So that's what we really want to see clearly with our mindfulness. We talk about mindfulness and detachment. Mindfulness and detachment is when you keep seeing that over and over and over. That fact that that's happening itself and there's no problems. Everything's okay. Now, you're right, though. Also, there are traumatic experiences that, when they trigger, they can literally shake the body. They can tremble the body. They can freak out the body. Like this. I've seen a video with with this guy who was. It was. I don't know if you guys know that book, The Waking Tiger, something like that, or Waking the Tiger. It's like a Peter Levine trauma somatic based therapy or something like that. But there was a video of him on stage with a guy who went through real war trauma, and he started bringing that trauma up in him, and his whole body starts twitching and shaking and moving completely automatically, right? So you have to see what kind of how much can you let yourself experience that without resisting it, Because as you stop resisting it and he really let it just come out and out, it just seemed to fade away. He seemed to get really relaxed when he was doing that whole kind of one-on-one therapy thing with him. He seemed to really just relax when he stopped resisting it. And that's what we really mean by everything's okay. You just stop resisting it because it's not personal, first of all. It's not personal. it's not something you're doing, right? So if we're resisting it, it's because we take it personally. I think this is our trauma, or this is
Yeah.
our, my negativity. But it's just stuff happening, man. You just be relaxed.
I wanna ask something. Sometimes I find it really confusing. I think it's really context dependent. Because you said not change.
Did your microphone cut out, Ivan? Or was that hello? Is it me?
No, Ivan?
Sorry, I muted someone. I forgot to unmute you, Lawrence, but it doesn't give me the option to unmute you, by the way. Maybe you can come back or something. Ivan, you're talking, but I can't hear you. It just all I see is that flickering blue talking thing.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Is it not really loud?
Oh, it's fine now. It's okay, yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm always confused. You said something like, we don't have to change our thoughts, and I understand.
No, I said you don't have to change the fact that let's say not the word change, but you don't have to think it's a
resist.
problem. These thoughts are coming themselves, right? So
Yes.
you can't change them because they're happening themselves. But when you recognize you're caught in them, you can change them, of course. I mean, that's the first way of getting out of these difficult things is just replacing the thoughts, But the fact that thoughts are happening is something, yeah, you have no control over. So it's not a problem. You want to view it as not a problem because it's an impersonal process, nothing to do with you. But the tendency, the habitual tendency, that underlying tendency to grasp onto these things personally is so strong that we often get caught up in them, right? So we get lost in the stories and we grasp onto these thoughts. And when you also recognize that you're in that thinking, you were that thinking, that was you doing that in a way, you believed in it, then you switch the thought, oh man, I'm so glad I caught that. You just switch the thought. It's just the moment you recognize it, you take that effort to just put the effort in to just turn it, just switch it. It's immediate. It's an immediate thing you do.
Yes, makes sense.
Can I go now?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. I was actually, not to freak anyone out or give anyone some anxiety, but I was just vomiting about that at like 10, I don't know, maybe 10:07. Like I smoked too many cigarettes anyway. And what happened with my great grandpa Jack with his PTSD from World War II was he died of lung cancer. And what happened essentially was he was hallucinating all the men he killed. And the guilt was just too much for him. And he said he'd rather be dead. Who cares? He was a great man. Very interesting.
Yeah, so
but yeah, I just vomited. I was like, you know what? Whatever. What's evilness anyway? Maybe it'll stop Mr. Dhammarato from vomiting later. That would be cool. That would be a cool thing to do with this cigarette that I'm not supposed to have anyway.
That reminds me about feedback loops. One thing is that even though thinking is not entirely a volitional process, it's always happening, we can change the inputs. And that's something that Dhammarato's mentioned before. And so fear and anxiety from the result of a traumatic experience, or even if it seems to occur spontaneously, if we didn't spot the cause, we can change the input often. And we can start putting positive inputs into the system, and we'll exit the feedback loop then in that case. And so often anxiety results from negative feedback. So I think that's something that could be considered.
So Edward, does that answer your question in a satisfying way, or do you want to elaborate a bit more into it?
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied. So I guess I would like to thank Brett also for the advice of stick to one thing, because yeah, like whatever, 30 minutes, an hour ago, my body was shaking, and I was in these thought loops, and so I was trying different things to see what would work, what worked best, and Anapanasati, it wasn't seeming to work too well. So I gave the mind a little bit more to do, which was the labeling. It sounds like this in my head: see, feel, see, hear, see, gone, rest, see, feel. You label those modalities, right? And that was working, but I noticed that I really didn't calm down until I stuck with Anapanasati. So it's nice to have different techniques on your tool belt, because the labeling helped when I needed it. But in the long run, the Anapanasati was what I needed. And I also want to say, don't judge yourself too hard for smoking a cigarette. Because we want to just bring the mind to feel good and relax the judgmental mind. At least that's what I think part of the point of this phone call is.
We don't have to let the judgmental mind even arise. We can catch it before it arises.
That would be a perfect world, and maybe possible.
Yeah, man, you just work from where you're at, just keep repping it out. We're repping it out. Does anyone else have something they want to talk about, or some question or something like this? Sorry, I don't know how to unmute you, but okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different meditations. I never heard of Anapanasati. Maybe it's something that I've heard of, but I don't recognize the name or something.
Can I ask where you come from, Lawrence, or how did you find Skype call, Discord, or Skype group? Can't hear you.
I was on the air a couple times, but I'm on the East Coast. Can you hear me? Probably don't have a good connection.
Now it sounds a bit better. Yeah, it sounds a bit better.
Yeah, I'm on the East Coast in the Boston area. I was on the call here a couple times before, and I heard Dhammarato on probably Guru Viking podcasts.
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is what Dhammarato talks about generally, so that's why I asked, because I was just curious where he came from. But yeah, he talks about he teaches Anapanasati, and actually, I think there's a really good introduction series to that. Still on his YouTube, but actually, yeah, there's like 2 different series on going quite in depth to the Anapanasati structure and how he teaches it. And one is with, if I remember right, maybe Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have one series with Alex, and then you have this old, very, very old videos that's like a 3 series part on discussing Anapanasati, which is much more in depth. Or sorry, not in depth, but it's like 4 or 5 hours long. Maybe.
If you want some newer videos, just go to Dhammarato's home page on YouTube, and there's 4 videos there called Introduction to Buddha Dhamma.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've heard of like mindfulness and mantra meditation, the Dhammapada and Thich Nhat Hanh, things like that.
Yeah, man, there's a whole world of spirituality out there, you know. There's a lot of stuff you can find yourself.
Sati means to remember that everything's okay right now. And Anapanasati is that nice long breath. You go, everything's okay.
Right.
You get away from the mind.
I think sometimes when I had anxiety, it's like, what if this, what if that? So I write down all the what ifs on a piece of paper, and then you have them all on a piece of paper, and they stop going around in your mind. It's weird how it works sometimes.
Yeah, journaling can be helpful.
Yeah, they say if you have an active mind, an active imagination, you can be prone to anxiety because the human mind is very complex, subject to neurotic types of thinking, I guess.
Yeah, Anapanasati is a very, very, very skillful way of dealing with the mind. It's a very, very skillful, systematic way of handling the mind, and it has enormous benefit when you practice. I mean, it's something that you see the benefit very quickly. So, we really want to focus on the fact that these are skills we develop. You know, this is a skill to be developed. That this is something we can do repetitively, and it only gets better. And that's what we talk about, delighting and creating joy and satisfaction right now, that it can develop. And that's what the mind is capable of. It has potential to stay in a joyful state, a satisfied state. And the more we get satisfied with this present moment, these thoughts that we experience have a lot less of a disturbance to our experience. You know, they disturb us a lot less when we feel good internally, when we actually have the skill to make ourselves feel good and relaxed, and that there is no enemies, there is no problems, there really is not much going on. That is something we need to fix. That there's so much happening actually that's so exciting. I mean, looking outside my window, I mean, I see so much life. I see so much birds and trees. I mean, there's so much happening. I can't help but now put that in my awareness too, because it's so interesting. It's so interesting that to just observe the present moment and start to have wholesome thoughts about what's happening right now. Because these thoughts are going to come up, you know, these anxiety thoughts, and everyone has their way to deal with these things, you know. Everyone has their way. I mean, for some people it's a cigarette, for some people it's a journal, for some people it's a TikTok video, scrolling, you know, going down the rabbit hole of distractions. But this is the most useful distraction. Probably the most useful distraction to have is your own ability to recognize and relax yourself with this skill. And this is what the Buddha taught, you know. This is what the Buddha taught. He taught Anapanasati as a full-fledged system. It's something we can practice and see very, you know, immediate results without having to wait for a long time or wait for 4 or 5 years following a system, going from one teacher to another. And the way Dhammarato teaches it, it's quite relatable. It's quite it can kind of take away the complexities, somehow keep them intact, but for you to understand them quite easily. Because there are 4 tetrads to Anapanasati, and Dhammarato quite emphasizes the fact you don't have to go step by step, that you can focus on step 10 of Anapanasati. And that's what, you know, that's what I heard in one of his very earlier videos, that this is something especially people from the Western part of the society need to do. Western part of the world is learn how to be happy. I mean, I never hear Asian people talking about doing this stuff. In Thailand, I never hear them talk about doing this. You know, they're just sort of ignorantly capable of being happy. But we have to sort of learn how to be happy and unlearn how to be to think so negatively, because that's what we've been taught, to think so unbelievably negative about everything. To always see what's the common, there's like a common, what's it called when you have the half cup full or empty or something like that. And you know, you're always thinking about, oh, the cup is half empty, my life sucks, you know, like coming out of this thought patterns into a very based, wholesome, having a good attitude, seeing things clearly. So these anxiety thoughts and all of these difficult thoughts, they're manageable, and that's the beauty and the success of doing this, is that you have confidence that you can handle these things. And that's when there's real joy in this meditation. Like there is real joy when you can you have the confidence that you can handle your own mind.
Yeah. I wanted to address something. Thank you, Cathal. I wanted to address something that Lars said regarding the complexity of the mind. Here over the years, as the practice deepened and I was able to investigate, I realized that the mind is really quite pure, and it's not complex. It was conditioning that was picked up in my upbringing, things that I read, and that I had to be responsible for. I couldn't just blame, or of course I tried to for many years, and I tried to rebel. I tried to blame all sorts of behaviors, but in the summation of, as the practice deepened, as I said, it's like, I had to accept responsibility and face the fact that, I picked up that conditioning. I engaged in the process of belief, and the complexities of the mind were something that I had to take responsibility for. And the practice of the Buddha's method provided everything I needed. I just had to stick with the practice and train the mind. And much of that was a time-bound process. Of course, not all of it had to be. And then finding the Sangha and finding noble friendship, finding others who were willing to give true feedback and sincere feedback that wasn't based on manipulation or loba dosa moha, which we just refer to as deceptive or manipulative intent. Ignorance leads to greed and hatred, and that's how the mind becomes complex. But the human mind doesn't start out with complexity. It starts out quite simple, with not a lot of instinctual content. Most of it's learned.
Yeah, I like you. I like you said that mind isn't complex unless it's in that kind of deceptive intention or wrong intention. It's yeah, I know, I see. It's when we want something, we get very complex. You know, when we want something, we get very our mind is very complex.
You're cutting off. Is it me or he's cutting off?
It's Cathal. I think his Wi-Fi connection's lagging some.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Oops.
Hello?
Yeah. Yes, I think we can hear you.
Weird, huh? Yeah. Yeah. I can just use this one. But is my microphone still cutting out or no?
Yeah, it's working. It's all right.
Okay, yeah. I was Brett, when you mentioned that, actually it's interesting. The mind is only complex and when it has a deceptive intention. That the complex thinking comes about when there's a wrong intention. Actually, that's interesting because when I notice when you're in a state of wanting something, that's when the mind gets complex. That's when the thinking gets very sticky and entangling. When we want something, but actually, when you're just in this experiencing mode or just in this contact mode with life, there's not much to think about. I mean, you just experience it. And people talk about just being, but also we should remember that we also need to skillfully stay out of the hindrances. And then just being is quite delightful, I have to say. But we what I've seen quite a bit is people often have this wholesome thoughts that is already rooted in the wrong intention. And that's why it becomes complex, because it's like rooted already in sensuality. So they already want something from the wholesome thoughts, and that's one of the biggest things I've seen on with this practice. And yeah, it's quite straightforward. I mean, it's quite a simple thing, and that's the difficult part. Is it's so simple that our tendency to make it complex is what makes it complex, rather than in it of itself is a simple thing. You just stick with the thought and watch it condition the feeling, and then enjoy the feeling and let that feeling unify. Let yourself enjoy the feeling so it unifies your mind, and staying out of all of those wavering thoughts about wanting something. It's quite simple, but God, it's really not at the same time. It's really simple, but it's really not. To do that over and over and over is quite a skill. But it can be done, and that's the nice thing.
Definitely. And I think it's important also to point out, just simply because we have folks who are new to the practice, is that wanting can also, aversion is also wanting to get rid of. So, I mean, this is basic, but it's also, I think, important to point out that wanting something also includes wanting to get rid of things and things that are aversive. So, aversion.
Yeah, when we're what we're really talking about when we're talking about this practice is when we look at how this whole dependent origination thing is working, we can look at the sixth link of this whole cycle of how the mind becomes, or comes from clinging into another state of wanting, or wanting to clinging to something into another state, and how it goes from state to state to state. And when we say everything's okay, actually what this really means is you're actually sitting at that sixth point, on that point of contact with reality. And we can see that there is this pleasant and unpleasant feelings, right? I mean, when we break it down like this, you can really just start to see it in your experience. When there is a liking feeling, there is also a tendency to grasp onto it. And when there is a feeling you don't like, there is a tendency to try to push it away. And the mind comes up with strategies to do both things, right? It becomes complicated because it falls into those two domains of grasping on or pushing away. And the difficulty is staying out of the process of clinging, or not letting the mind be into the state of clinging, or upadana. Because once it gets to that point, it gets, I mean, you actually still have room to bring it back. You still have room, but it gets very small. There's just a mind flash where you will take an action dependent on that clinging. You're completely identified with that clinging. So you've like snuffed you're like a dog who sniffs the trail, you know? And when you get absorbed into that sniffing, you're just off on a hunt to get what you want. And then you're going to look for it. I mean, the mind is going to find a strategy for it. And then we end up in another unwholesome state. So we are like reborn. And this is how Buddhadasa talks about this rebirth process is a very fast thing. It's happening very quickly. That we are being reborn into mind states continually because we cling, basically. So what the practice is really is staying here with this input of reality and enjoying it. And enjoying, because you're not enjoying it if you're wanting something and clinging to something. It's not enjoyable. It's dukkha. You are to see the dukkha there. I mean, it does not feel good. You know, you start to really wake up to the fact that this is so deceptive. This tendency is super deceptive. It does not feel good whatsoever. And it's the more you recognize how good it feels to just enjoy this moment and actually like really bring yourself into just what's happening, you start to get a bit immersed into that experience more and more and more as you drop those thoughts that want something more, that's dissatisfied. You catch the dissatisfaction. And if you just do that repetitively, what happens is you just start to immerse in the moment. It becomes very intense and enjoyable. And and you know, however long you want to sit in this moment is up to you, really. It's up to you. And because most of the time what happens is you'll come to this like very nice satisfied state, but then somewhere along the way there's a thought of wanting something. There's just somewhere along the way, and somehow we end up like back in the cycle, and then we repeat the process because it happens so fast. This thing happens really fast. So when we talk about there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to do, what really that means is quite a skillful, watchful, enduring, having a strong attitude, awareness about all of these pulls and tugs that are happening in this point of contact with reality. It'll pull you everywhere, you know. The mind objects really pull you all over the place. They'll make you fly across the half the world, you know. They're kind of they're so, I mean, it's just kind of beautiful sometimes to see how this works, but it's also difficult to get a handle on it. But you will get a handle on it as you practice. I mean, it's never been straightforward for me. For some people, I've noticed it can be very straightforward for them. They just get it. But for me, it's just quite a repetitive thing. I'm like, man, I didn't know that was dukkha. And then I'm like, okay, is that dukkha? I'm not sure. Let me do it again. And then eventually I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm just done. So I think this is where we come to dispassion for these tendencies, dispassion for clinging, because we see over and over and over dissatisfaction. The dissatisfaction. Nothing is satisfying. No thing is satisfying, but we keep separating ourselves and these objects as things. It's like objects of perceptions of separate forms. We keep taking them personally over and over and over.
And it's not a puzzle.
Mm-mm.
Everybody thinks it's a puzzle box you have to figure out. But it's just,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you be satisfied here and now? It's not a difficult thing to try to grasp. Oh, I have to understand it like a Rubik's cube. No. It's the opposite of that. It's the opposite of the Western mindset of studying and getting it right. It's just, can you be satisfied with the way things are here and now? With only the breath.
Yeah, Yeah, that's one thing. That's one thing I sort of experienced too. Is this never going straight forward, never really getting it right, you know. But then also wanting to get it right was also just seeing that as dukkha, and then become a lot less of a problem. Not trying to get things right, just being here with what's really happening. This is the sati, you know. We just want to be here and look what's actually happening. For every single one of us, we have a different, a different mind, a different complexity. What the hell is this, man? This is kind of cool. I never saw this before.
It's been a while, but I think we did this like a year ago when Dhammarato was in the call. I remember like an OSF call.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's I just really quite appreciate the way Dhammarato and here Dhammadasa explains these things, that when you you know, you search for what is Pacchissamuppada, what is the dependent origination, you get this vastly, what seems to be very difficult to understand. You know, you have this scientific breakdown of every link and what each link means, but you know, it's quite useful to have an intellectual grasp. But the reality is that, wow, it's very different than our experience with the feeling, you know, because it's a feeling experience. It happens. I mean, it's happening in the feeling part of our mind. We call this the chitta in Buddhism, you know. It's a Pali word for the analytical mind and the feeling mind. And what happens is this process is happening because of the feeling, yeah, not the intellectual mind. So
Yeah,
no
I
matter
find
how much you read or how much you get it right intellectually, in that very fast mind moment, are you giving in? Are you able to restrain? Are you able to see it clearly? You know? Sorry, I heard someone talk. Or
well, yeah,
maybe it was just a
yeah. So I looked up the Anapanasati. It looks kind of the same as like the mindful meditation of observing the breath and the mental states, and deep breath, short breath, and emotional states. And I think it's interesting observing the emotional states. I always found that to be useful sometimes.
yeah.
We're done.
I remember I read this a while ago, but it was like emotions are just like sticky thoughts. We take them a bit more personally because they stick around, but we see thoughts, we can see thoughts as much more impersonal because they're quite fleeting. You know, you can catch them and they start to dissipate quite fast, but emotions have this stickiness and we're a lot more inclined to take them personally. But it's still in the realm of, well, this is not yours, man. This is not yours.
Isn't there a thing where you observe whether your mind is cloudy or not? It's my mind is cloudy, my mind is clear.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
observing the mood.
Well, cloudiness, like it's like your mind generates static or something. It's kind of strange.
I think people call it oh, what's it called? There's like a brain fog. Maybe it's brain fog. Is that something like that?
I wasn't sure what that means, but I've heard people say it.
It's like the mind is protecting itself against too much information, so it just clouds out or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it becomes very hard to think analytically. It's sort of difficult to think straight. It's not clear. It's like concepts are really hard to get down, get high down. It's like things don't add up, you know. All the words are mushy, all, you know. But this is just another passing state. I mean, these states are happening quite often to us. These moods just come and go. But the attitude, yeah, the attitude is what we can maintain. The right attitude, keeping it easy, keep it, you know, remembering that you can handle all of these changing moods and changing mind states. You can handle it. It's not a problem. It's really not a problem. That's the beauty in having the right attitude. It's very strong, determined attitude that this is okay and you don't need to fix that. You don't need to get rid of it. It just comes. It's okay.
I mean, it's interesting how like it seems like some places are more conducive to meditation. Like if you go out in the woods, like sometimes it's more quiet. But I find if I go way out in the woods where I'm like there's no roads and it's all for me it gets too quiet. So I like somewhere in the middle. Like I need to be away from noise, but kind of near a dirt road or something.
Yeah. I just had a conversation with my friend about this, about seclusion, because he's someone I met like years ago at a monastery, and he's really into selfless work. So he's quite involved with people, you know, like he's quite involved with activities, and he's really into that whole devotional stuff. It's not like Hare Krishna or something like that, but it's just charity work. Something like that. I don't know. But anyway, he was talking to me about he has a difficult time basically maintaining this balance of seclusion and being in the world. You know, like it's too much to be in the world all the time. It's too much to be around people all the time, because the mind is very fast around people, because our personality gets triggered so much when we're with other people that this can make the mind very, very, you know, bring up so much stuff that the way I remember when I first had a conversation with Dhammarato, he talked about it. He's not a fan of a long time reclusion, first of all. Seclusion, sorry. He's not a fan of long time seclusion, but he does mention the way to do it in the sense of rinsing. You have like a towel, you know, and you soak up the towel, and then you squeeze it out, and then you go back, and you squeeze it out, and you go back. But what's really happening, what you really want to have underlying develop is internal seclusion.
Yeah.
Having internal seclusion, because it doesn't really matter where you are too much. I mean, everywhere is kind of it has a potential for meditation. There's nowhere that doesn't have a potential for meditation. But in seclusion, you really get to clear your mind out, you know, you really get to see what the hell is going on there. It's very difficult. Yeah, I mean, seclusion is quite difficult. Real seclusion, like, I mean, away from your phone, away from your family, away from people in general, away from your magazines and your MP3 players and your Dhamma talks and your Dhamma books. I mean, really going out, man, going out into the forest and seeing how can I handle my mind. And as you practice in that setting, I mean, the amount of strength, the amount of firmness and establishment you have in yourself to deal with the world is invaluable. So there's like this balance between doing both of those things. I mean, I think there's a biblical quote, being in the world but not of it, something like that. Jesus said that, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe was it one of his apostles or Jesus? I forgot. But
yeah,
developing that being in the world but not of it, you know, being in the world but not a part of it, because it's difficult to practice when you're surrounded by so much trash. When you're with your family and you have kids and you have duties and a job, it's just more difficult, but it's still manageable. There's still results and success there. It's not something. There's still potential everywhere. Is basically what I'm saying. But I really recommend seclusion and finding your own middle way. Basically, finding what works for you, and keep following whatever your middle way is, which seems to be for you not too much silence, but just around a dirt road and hearing some of the people on their bikes is relaxing. I mean, that's okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah, my camp is up in Maine, and maybe like a car goes by like maybe once every 2 hours in the middle of the night. But where I live here, and it's a lot. I live in the suburbs. It's a little bit noisier and just more active. But I go to my camp, and it's really quiet. and it's good for a while, but then after a while, I think I get lazy or something, and just I want to come back. I think, well, I got to go back, or sometimes I feel like I don't spend enough time there. But I figure if I spend too much time there, I wouldn't want to stay there anymore. Like, you always got to be somewhere.
Yeah.
That might be something worth investigating, is what's behind the urge to be somewhere or to keep moving in the mind.
Well, it's like a cycle of rest. You got to do all this stuff, and you're active, and then you sort of rest and go on a retreat, and then you go back and forth. Cycle of thinking.
That is the standard meditator is you go into a retreat and you come back, and after a while you get sucked back into a whole bunch of old habits, and then you want out, get me out of here again, and then you go back into another retreat. It's I mean, that was my experience. That was my experience.
That's how the week is set up. You work Monday to Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday you're off, and then you go back again. I don't know.
That's why what we're really truly focused on is wisdom, real wisdom. Because the problem is that we really don't comprehend the fact that these things are dukkha. These things are dissatisfying. That's why we go back into them over and over and over. We might think we do, yeah, in our thinking mind. But in our feeling experience, it's still not there. It's still not in harmony. And this is a big gap between thinking and feeling, So when we're up there in the cabin and we have this restlessness, this strong, I need to get out here. I want to go back and watch TV. I want to call my mother, That's where we have to be with that feeling experience. And experience it and not run away from it, because that's what we do our whole lives. I feel restless, I'm bored, and then you go fix it by doing something. So conditioning, distraction never frees us. And in Buddhism, we're really about freedom. We're not about control or fixing with these temporary solutions or band-aids. We want real freedom. We want to be free forever. True freedom. So we have to really look and start to look at reality with these difficult feelings, and practice right there when they come up.
I wanted
to say, Cathal, that I appreciated what you said about seclusion being inner, and in the practice here, I think early on, I made a decision to consider seclusion from the hindrances. And so then when teachers would say Viveka or seclusion in Pali, to me that means when the hindrances are suppressed to some level, by staying with the breath, not by studying the hindrances, not by thinking about it, not by becoming a scholar, but just this breath, and staying with the breath and training to stay with the breath. One doesn't need to necessarily study the hindrances in breath meditation, just return to the breath. And when the hindrances fall away, sometimes that's our first experience of dukkha at those subtle levels. And it can only be experienced in some cases. Certainly in my case, I was only able to feel the freedom from dukkhas that are so subtle that they can't be detected when we're busy, when we're involved in restlessness, when we're worried, when our bodies are moving to escape from the dukkha of the shaking of the citta. And so then seclusion always means it can always be found by returning to the breath in the middle of activity, in the middle of rest, in the middle of the night, while we're doing chores, when we're at work. It can be found, and that's the beauty of the Buddha's method for me in the experience here.
I think the thing about seclusion or being out in the woods is I like being alone sometimes, but sometimes if I'm alone for too long, then maybe I'm not sure I like it anymore.
Yeah, what Brett was saying is quite often what a lot of people are doing is pushing away the hindrances. They're sort of somehow in some technique or something like that. They seem to be able to make them disappear. Suppress them or somehow like push them back into the mind where they seem like you have relief from it. There's some weird texture to that method of concentrating on the breath. I mean, when you concentrate your attention to the point where you feel like you're getting absorbed and you start refining that absorption, it feels like you're going down a tunnel and you lose that awareness of what's actually going on. It feels like all the hindrances are gone, but it's a very strange texture to samadhi. It's a very strange experience, but this is what a lot of people are doing. And the problem is with that is there's still no freedom. There's no real freedom there. It's just another band-aid. We have these techniques to get rid of the dukkha, but it's still not freedom. And we don't need to study the hindrances, but we need to recognize a hindrance as a hindrance. So when we look at that sutta, what's the Pali name? I heard it like 10 times now. Sabha Asava Sutta. Am I saying that right? Does anyone know? All the defilements, Majjhima Nikaya number 2. Sabha Asava. Anyway, the Buddha says, cutting the defilements is one for one who sees, not for one who does not see. And what that means is we actually see a hindrance as a hindrance. It's not that, I know this is a hindrance, but I'm going to give into it anyway. That's not seeing. That's not seeing. That's not seeing clearly. So we don't truly see the hindrance as a hindrance. We still give into it and allow it to hinder us, because there's still some part of our mind that values what that hindrance is pointing to, which is probably sensuality. Usually,
if I may,
any of the 5 hindrances. Yeah.
I tend to think that in cases like that, it's because you're not really ready to give up the hindrance. You can't skip steps. You've got to perform the practice properly and faithfully, and if you do it properly, then you will make progress naturally, and if you don't, then you simply won't. And
that's what Dhammadasa was saying. You can't really get it right. You can't figure it out before it happens. We only can deal with it as it's happening, and you never really get it straightforward, man. You just, like you said, you're not really ready to let go. The dispassion isn't there. True dispassion is not arisen because of a lack of panya, lack of seeing things clearly. If we see it clearly, we really see that's putting your hand in the fire. I mean, there's no way you could put it back in. So there's just still delusion apparent to that thought. There's still something there we want. We at least we think we want, right? So there's no getting it right. I'm not pointing to, this is the ideal way. You must do it like this, and then if you fail, you're not practicing correctly. No, you're practicing completely fine. It's just that we always want to be faithful, like you said, have this longing, this truthful, honest relationship with, I want to understand this. I really want to see what the hell is this, Is this dukkha, Look into it. Don't let it deceive you. Don't keep it swept under the rug. Like, try to see it. Put the honest view, put the honest intention in. That's the way to go, I think. Does anyone else have any questions? We're popping this for an hour and 10 minutes, man. Anyone have anything they want to discuss or? Okay, guys. Well, I don't have much left to say, so I really appreciate everyone hopping in here, and we all sort of hope Dhammarato comes back.
Thanks, dude.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank you.
Thank you
Hey,
all
guys.
for your insight and time.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Shit.
Sadhu.